All right, Yevamos, good morning. Let us begin with a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Adar Beis. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this month in honor of all those who helped to put together the beautiful groundbreaking. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Avigayil Alpern, in memory of her daughter Rachel Leah Zichron L'Racha Bas Avigayil, and with gratitude to the shir. We hope that the neshama has an aliyah and the family a nechama. But with that, let us begin. So today's daf is daf Chav Gimel 23, and we are picking up on Chav Beis 22b, pretty much at the two dots in the middle of the daf. The two dots where it says TORAH Rabbanan. So just to kind of close out, we ended yesterday with a very beautiful sugya where the Gemara was talking about the idea that if a man has a son who is a mamzer, so we were talking about from a halachic perspective that the existence of that son is essentially means the man did not die childless, and therefore again the man's widow is not subject to yibum. The novelty, of course, is that even though this is a son born of an illicit union, nevertheless, just like we saw that a brother is a brother, so a son is a son is a son. Furthermore, the Gemara said that Allah Lamaisa, such a son, were he to strike his father, ultimate, or to curse his father, would be chayiv for striking or would be chayiv for cursing. So the Gemara said, but 1 second, you're only chayiv for doing those things if you curse or hit someone who lives their lives in conformance with, Jewish values. This man, this father, he fathered a mamzer. So because he fathered a mamzer, clearly he's not living his life in conformance with Jewish values, to which the Gemara said he did tshuva. Hagar did tshuva. Isn't creating a mamzer one of the things that you cannot do tshuva for? To which the Gemara ended off by saying, miha osem ma'asa amchohu. So I had mentioned this in the Daf Chazari yesterday. I apologize, I posted it later on in the evening. But what you see from this Gemara is something truly beautiful, which is that halacha l'maisa, there's a distinction sometimes between how we act and who we are. That sometimes the way that I act is not good, and I do things that are inappropriate, and I behave in ways that are not befitting. But l'maisa, that doesn't change who I am. I could do bad things, but still be a good person. And this is one of the most profound things we have in Yiddishkeit. The proof to this is the ability to do tshuva, right? In other words, if how I acted totally and wholly defined who I was, then there would be no ability to do tshuva in the aftermath of sin. Because if I act in a sinful way, that means I am a sinful person. But what Yiddishkeit understands is, although my actions absolutely highlight or portray in certain respects who I am, but l'maisa, again, it's not the totality of who I am. That even if I do negative things, even if I engage in negative behaviors, halacha l'maisa, there is still a piece of me that is good, that is intact. If we have time at the end of the daf, I'm going to come back and share with you a beautiful idea by the Ger Rebbe that highlights that concept. But again, I want to make sure that we cover some ground here. So the Gemara says as follows: So TORAH Rabbanan, haba lachos aviv bas eshes aviv. If a person has relations with his sister, and this is a sister who is also bas eshes aviv, ultimately, again, the daughter of the father's wife. So in other words, this is a daughter that his father, right? So we'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain's father has a wife. His wife happens not to be Ruvain's mother, right? So he's married to another woman now. So Allah said he has a daughter with that woman. Ruvain has relations with this girl, so she has two identities. She is essentially his sister, but she's also the daughter of his father's wife. What's the halacha? Chayiv mishum achos mishum bas eshes aviv. Ultimately, again, he is chayiv for having relations with his sister, and he's also chayiv for having relations with the daughter of his father's wife. So dual liability. Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, no, halacha l'maisa, he's only chayiv because of his sister, not chayiv because of the daughter of the father's wife. V'lo mipnei bas eshes aviv. So let's analyze this machlokas. My tamay the Rabbanon. What's the logic of the Rabbanon who say that you're chayiv twice? Amri michtik siv ervas achoscha bas avicha ubas imecha. Pasuk says, the erva of your sister, who is the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, ervas bas ishes aviv, moledes avicha achoschahi lamali. So I will say, Torah already tells me explicitly that if a man has relations with his sister, whether this is the sister, the daughter of his father, his sister, the daughter of his mother, halacha l'maaseh, he is chayiv. Why do I then need a supplemental pasuk that says, ervas bas ishes avicha? Literally again, the erva of the daughter of the wife of your father, moledes avicha, who was birthed by your father, is your sister. Why do I need that pasuk? In other words, the say it's redundant. The pasuk already told me that halacha l'maaseh, if a girl is the daughter of my father, then what? Then she's my sister. This pasuk is redundant. Shmamina lechaybo mishum achoso umishum bas eshes abi. So we'll say, so because the pasuk is not really contributing any new information, it must be coming to teach me an additional layer of liability. That if a man has relations with his sister, who is also the daughter of his father's wife, that there's dual liability. There's liability for relations with one's sister, and there is liability ultimately, again, for relations with the daughter of one's father's wife. I will say, but you say to yourself, if it's us or it's us, what does it matter? Remember again, if it's a case of shogeg, like accidental liability, ultimately it could mean 2 sets of malchus, right? 2 sets of lashes. Or potentially, again, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, 2 karbanos. So understanding what you're liable for absolutely does make a difference. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, who says that you're only chayiv once for achoscha, for sister, what's his logic? Amarkra, achoscha hi. Pasuk says, she is your sister. Mishum achoso atamachayvo, v'atamachayv mishum bas eshes aviv. Ultimately, again, you are chayiv because she is your sister, but you are not chayiv ultimately, again, because she is the daughter of your father's wife. Good. So we'll say, so fundamental machlokas about liability in this case. V'rabbanon, so we'll say, now we're going to go back and analyze the drashas. V'rabbanon, hay achoschahi, my abdile. We'll say, what do the Rabbanon do with the pasuk of achoschahi? She's your sister. Mibayde lechayvo al achoso bas aviv ubas imo. Well, this is very interesting. This is fascinating. Achoscha comes to teach me that you're chayiv for having relations with your sister, who is the daughter of both your father and your mother. I will say, I know what you're thinking. Isn't that obvious? In other words, if I'm chayiv for having relations with my sister, who's just my sister through my mother, or just my sister through my father, then what? Alachas kama v'kama, I'm chayiv for relations with my sister, who's the daughter of both my parents. So what do we learn from here? So the Gemara says, Lomar, shein maskirim min adin. So we'll say this teaches us a very important halachic principle, which is we do not punish based on logical inference. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, in other words, when it comes to administering a punishment, whether it's misa, karban, malchus, depending on what it is, we punish based on an explicit verse, based on an explicit pasuk, not based on logical inferences, which I will say is such an incredible yesod. Ein masir min adin essentially says, you cannot punish, or in other words, you cannot create culpability based on logical inference. And I will say, what a profound lesson for life as well. You cannot create culpability. Don't judge people based on assumptions that you make. Don't hold people liable in your court of personal opinion based on conclusions you reach through your own deductions. If you're going to hold someone liable, if you're going to make someone culpable, if you're going to go ahead and condemn someone, even in the courtroom of your own mind, make sure you have legitimate reasons to do so, and not just based on some observations or some ideas that you may have that are floating around. Such an incredible yesod. So the Gemara Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, in Kein Liftar Rachamana Achoscha. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda will say, if that's the case, the Torah could just say Achoscha. Why does it have to say he? Why do you need that extra word lamali? Mishum Achoscha atamachayvo v'atamachayvo mishum bas eshes abicha. I will say to teach us that in this case of a sister who is also the daughter of my father's wife, so in other words, a half-sister from my father, achoscha he, comes to teach me that if I have relations with her, the liability is only for sister and not for the daughter of the father's wife. To which the Gemara says, V'Rabbanan, the Rabbanan will say, Afagav dichsiv achoscha, itztrich lemichtov hi. The Rabbanan will say, even though it says achoscha, you still need to say he. Why? Shelo tomar ba'alma mashir min adin. Because they will say, otherwise you might have thought that in general, we can't punish based on logical inference. If that's the case, then ultimately, again, why does the Torah have to say achoscha at all? Milsa da'asi b'kavach omer tarach v'kasav lakra. They both say sometimes even things that can be learned out from a kavach omer, the Torah goes out of its way to write a pasuk. Therefore, kasav rachmanahi. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, imke lichtav rachmanah lachoscha hi beidach kra. If that's the case, says the Gemara, why not go ahead and write a choschahi in a different pasuk? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, Hai bas eshes avicha, my avid. So we'll say, what does Rabbi Yossi do? What does he do with the phrase bas eshes avicha, my avdile? To which the Gemara says, mi boile mish yesh lo ishus la avicha ba. So we'll say, it's actually quite interesting. It comes to teach me that the only time I am chayev for having relations with my sister is when she comes from a woman whom my father could have married. All right. So in other words, the definition of halachic sister for arayos purposes means someone, a girl who comes from a union with my father, and a woman whom my father technically could have married. So what does this come to exclude? Prat. But what does this come to exclude? This comes to exclude if my father is a daughter with a shivcha, a non-Jewish maidservant, or an akum, or a non-Jewish woman, that ultimately, again, there is no ishus. So I'll say because no marriage could be affected, ultimately, again, through those unions, therefore, halacha l'maisa, that's not my sister, and were I to have relations with her, again, there would not be biblical liability. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ve'ema prat la'achoso me'anusa, or maybe it comes to exclude, what about the case of where the father violated a woman? As a result of that act of violation, ultimately, again, there was a daughter who was born. Maybe, perhaps the Torah is coming to tell me that she's not my sister, right? That she's not my sister. To which the Gemara says, Hahilo matzas amris midirava. The Rava Ramiksiv, because Rava contrasted Psukim. Torah says, Ervas bas bincha o bas blitcha lo sigala. Torah says, the daughter of your son, or the daughter of your daughter, your granddaughter, is an erva. Ha bas bina dida u bas bita dida shari. I will say, what do you see from here? You see that ultimately, again, however, halacha lamaisa, if a woman's granddaughter, or a woman's daughter's daughter, or a woman's son's daughter is mutter, uksiv, ervas isha ubita lo sigala, as basbina, bez basbita ha-ketzad. So we'll say, so then how does that work? Because the Torah says that halacha lamaisa, again, a woman and her daughter are an erva, and the Torah indicates that even again, granddaughter is also an erva. So how could that work? To which the Gemara says, "Haketzad kan ba'onsin kan benisuin." We'll say very, very interesting halacha. If you look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says kan ba'onsin ervas basbincha me anusasa lo segale ha basbina me ish acher gale. So we'll say it's very interesting. In a case where a man violated a woman, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, the erva status remains on that woman, her daughter, and her daughter, or her son, or daughter, or the wife of her son. We'll say, but interestingly enough, grandchildren as an erva only applies in a normal case of marriage, not in a case of violation. Interesting idea. Top of Chav Gimel, ve'ema prat l'chayve lavin. Maybe it comes to exclude Chayve Lavin and coming to teach more. Take a look at the top Rashi of Anchif Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Chayve Lavin im nasa aviv mamzeres v'holid bas lavachosi. So remember what we're trying to do over here. We're trying to figure out which cases, if my father has a daughter, are they considered my sister, and which cases are they not considered my sister? The Gemara now is trying to understand over here. It seems to be that Allah l'maisa, there's definitely an exemption. In other words, or an exclusion, I should say. There's definitely a case of someone who is the biological daughter of my father, yet what? Is halachically not considered to be my sister. So the idea so far that we floated is, who does it apply to? Shivcha and avodas kochavim, right? And ovedas kochavim. So not Jewish women. Not Jewish women. Why? Because again, the Gemara is floating the idea that halacha l'maisa, only a woman, only when it says bas eshes avicha, Torah refers to my sister as one of the cases, my sister of the daughter of my father's wife. So the Gemara learns from here, only a woman who, technically speaking, your father could marry, if they have a daughter, is your halachic sister. But anyone whom your father cannot marry, ultimately the offspring of that union will not be my sister. So again, the easiest case to fit into that box is where my father has a daughter with a non-Jewish woman. He can't marry her. Halachically, he can't marry her. Therefore, lemaisa, she's not my sister. Says the Gemara, maybe it applies to Avigayil Alpern. Maybe in the following case, let's say the father marries someone he's not allowed to. For example, my father is a Kohen and he marries a Grusha. Or he's not a Kohen, he's Yisrael, but he marries a Mamzeres. He has a daughter with that wife. Maybe she's not my sister, quote unquote. She's not my sister halachically for erva purposes, because again, my father is not really allowed to marry her. Amra Papa, no, that's not a good example. I'll tell you why. Because Avigayil Alpern tafsi bahu kiddushin. Dichsiv, so remember again. See, why doesn't it work? Because when it comes to Avigayil Alpern, it's true. You're not allowed to marry this woman, but if you did, it works. If you did, it works. So of course she's going to be my sister, because even though my father's doing something usher by marrying this woman, nevertheless, halacha l'maisa, kiddushin is tofsin, the kiddushin works. The Gemara says, how do we know this? Here we go. Amra, the Gemara says, Dichsev, Amra Papa, Avigayil Alpern tafsi b'kiddushin, Dichsev, kisena le'ishtei noshim. If a man will marry two women, ha'achas ahuva va'achas snua, one is beloved and one is despised, says the Gemara. Is there a situation of a woman who is beloved and a woman who is despised by the Torah? And as Rabbi say, what the Gemara is intrigued by over here is the following. Look at Rashi. Yesh ahuva lefnei hamakom sorech chaya lo lahaskir shimzeh haya ohev es zu v'sone es zu Eina b'chora mishtana dekach pshita shimzeh sona eina makom sona. Supposed to remember again, what's the context of the pasuk? It's really fast. What's the context of the pasuk? A man is married to two women. He loves one, he despises the other. Right? Let's say that his firstborn son comes from the despised wife. What's the halacha? The halacha is that son is the bachar, right? The halachic firstborn. He gets double portion inheritance. What the Gemara is saying is, who cares who he loves and who he despises? In other words, why does the Torah have to tell me that if he has two wives and he likes one more than the other, and the firstborn comes from the wife who he loves, from the wife who he doesn't like so much, that he's, of course that child is the Bechar. We'll say, Bechar, firstborn status, is not a function of who you like and who you get along with, right? Right? Firstborn status is a function of who is born first. So the Gemara says, why does the Torah have to tell us about a wife who is beloved and a wife who is despised? To which the Gemara says something amazing. Ella, ahuva. So we'll say what it means. So the Gemara says, is there someone who is beloved and someone who is despised before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Torah is a book of law. So why are you telling me this? Watch this. Ella, the Gemara says, Ella, ahuva b'nisu'eha, snua b'nisu'eha. Rabbi says it's fascinating. The Torah, the Gemara says, when the Torah says beloved and despised, it's not referring to relationships. What is it referring to? The nature of the marital bond. There is a marital bond that is beloved and a marital bond that is despised. What's the marital bond that is beloved? A kosher marriage. What's the marital bond that is despised? An illegal marriage. An illegal marriage. But even though the Gemara says, V'amrachmana, Kisiena, what do you see? So even though you have a snua, even though you have a marital bond that is despised, why is it despised? Why is it despised? Because it's illegal. Nevertheless, what? It works. So therefore, again, the idea, so you see from here that snua, according to the Gemara, means that there is a marriage that Hashem does not like. What is a marriage that Hashem does not like? a Kohen marries a Gerusha, right? A man marries a Mamzeres. Any case that you're not supposed to marry a woman, but halacha l'maisa, you did it anyway, and the marriage, technically speaking, works. Hashem does not like that union. So therefore, again, coming full circle, halacha l'maisa, at the end of the day, it can't be coming to exclude a sister who is the result of chayvei lavin. Why not? Because although such a marriage like that is illegal, l'maisa what? It still works. Okay. Ve'ema prat l'chayvei krisus. So I was saying, listen to this. Let's say, remember, just let's keep our eye on the ball. Here's what we know. One is liable for having relations with one's sister. The whole way that this discussion went ahead and kind of got started was, what about if you have a sister who's your sister and also the daughter of your father's wife? How do you have a situation like that? Easy. It's a paternal sister. It's the same woman. In other words, it's the paternal sister. We have the same father, right, but not the same mother. My father's remarried to someone else. Father's this daughter. So now this girl, she's my sister. She's also the daughter of my father's wife. So ultimately, again, if a man has relations with this type of woman, is he chayiv once, chayiv twice? Right? That's a machlokes. Rabbanan say he's going to be chayiv twice, once for sister, and ultimately again once for father's wife's daughter. And Rabbi Yossi says only chayiv once for sister. That then sparks an entire conversation about the psukim regarding sister. Here's what we know. The way that the Torah phrases the prohibition of sister, of achoscha, is coming to exclude some type of case. What type of case is the Torah coming to exclude? So one idea that the Gemara floated was, essentially the Torah says, what's the lashon of the pasuk? Sorry. Achoscha bas eshes avicha. Torah says, your sister, the daughter of your father's wife. So the Gemara now is darshaning. I'll tell you what it's coming to exclude. It's excluding a woman whom your father cannot marry. In other words, in order for this girl to be my sister, she has to be bas eshes avicha. She has to, at the end of the day, be from a woman with whom my father could have technically married. Great. Who's excluded by that? So far we know for sure who's excluded by that. Who's excluded by that? Non-Jewish women. Right? That's easy, right? Because obviously, again, my father can't marry a non-Jewish woman. We're trying to see, well, maybe there are other exclusions. So now the Gemara says, for example, what if my father fathers a daughter with a woman who is a chiyuv kares to him? Okay, let's say he has a daughter with his sister, right? With his sister, chiyuv kares, right? Or another married woman. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, "Ve'im prat l'chayvei krisos, Amar Rava Amar Kra, ervas achoscha bas avicha o bas imecha, moledes bayis o moledes chutz." Supposed to listen to this. When the Torah phrases the erva of a sister, it says the erva of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, who is born in the home, o moledes chutz, or born outside. Says the Gemara. So what does that mean? Bein she'omrim lo la'avicha kayim, bein she'omrim lo la'avicha hotzei, v'amar achmana choschahi. They both say this is incredible. Moledes bayis, the Gemara wants to suggest, means a sister born to a union that is a sustainable one. Moledes chutz means even a sister who is born into a union that what? We tell the father, you have to divorce this woman. Either way, she's your sister. So both say you begin to see that halacha l'maisa, even if my father has this daughter, ultimately again, and she is part, or she is the result of an illegal, or maybe even an illicit union, halacha l'maisa what? She's still my sister. And therefore again, there's liability. Ema, bein she'omer lo la'avicha kayim, bein she'omer lo la'avicha hotzei, v'amar achmana achoschahi, l'rabos achoso mishivcha, well, if that's the case, you're telling me that if my father has a daughter, whether it's from a marriage that's sustainable or a marriage where they tell my father, you cannot go ahead and remain with this woman, the product of this union is still my sister. Well, if that's the case, let's come full circle. Maybe that even comes to include who? Even if he has a daughter with a non-Jewish woman. Maybe that's also called my sister. And therefore, again, there should be liability. Amrikra, bas eshes avicha. No. But to that, we revert back to the drasha we had before. The definition of a daughter is bas eshes avicha. Mishi yeshlo ishus la avicha ba. Prat la'achoso mishivcha va'avodos kochavim. So this is actually really quite interesting. Apparently, again, the baseline over here is that in order for a girl to be considered my sister, she has to come from a relationship with my father, with a woman with whom my father could have technically married. Technically married. If there is no possibility for kiddushin to be tofsin in that situation, then lamaisa, again, she is not my sister. Umarois. So ultimately, again, how do you know which cases to include and which cases to exclude? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, mistabra chaybe krisos habele rabos. It makes sense that ultimately, again, cases of chaybe krisos, that halacha lamaisa, if my father, so we'll say with this case, if my father has relations with a woman who is a chiyuv kares to him and has a girl, that girl is my sister. Why does that make sense? Shekain tavsei ban kiddushin li alma. See, I both say, let's say chas shalom, we'll call him father. Father has relations with his sister, right? Chiyuv kares, and they have a girl. That girl is my sister. And we're to have relations with her. Ultimately, again, halacha lamaisa, I'd be chayiv for that. They both say, why don't you come to say that halacha lamaisa, again, he can't have kiddushin with her. Because he can't have kiddushin with her, therefore, because they both say, even though my father can't have kiddushin with this woman who is his sister, who can? Everyone else. In other words, she is kiddushinable. In other words, that halacha lamaisa, she is in the parsha of kiddushin. Masha'en kain, ultimately again, shivcha, and avodas kochavim are not shayich to kiddushin at all, right? No one could have kiddushin with a shivcha. No one could have kiddushin with a non-Jewish woman because they're not subject to the laws of kiddushin. Adrabah, shivcha b'avodas kochavim havelei rabos. I can say just the opposite. Shivcha and avodas kochavim should be included. Why? Di'i magaira l'didei nami tafsi b'kiddushin. Because we'll say, what would happen if the shivcha? What would happen to the shivcha or the avodas kochavim who would convert? Right? If they convert, they could marry this man. They could marry the father. The Gemara says, come on, that's not a good example. As we'll say, when a person converts, what happens? They become someone fundamentally different. Right? When a person converts, it's like a rebirth. It's not the same person. B'Rabbanan. So both say B'Rabbanan shivcha v'ovedes kochavim enadu. So say, so remember again, Rabbi Yossi understands from the pasuk of achoscha bas eshes avicha. So Rabbi Yossi makes his drasha that ultimately again halacha l'maisa, only a woman whom your father could have technically married produces a girl who is your halachic sister. But if your father can't marry her, then halacha l'maisa, the product of that union, a girl, is not your halachic sister. Where do the Rabbanon learn that from? How do they know that if my father fathers a daughter with a non-Jewish woman, that she is not my sister? That she's not my sister, and I'm not chayiv. To which the Gemara says, "Nafkalu meha isha v'yiladeha tihiyeh la'adoneha." So we'll say this is fascinating. Very simple. They learn that from the pasuk that says that if a Jewish man fathers children with a shivcha, we'll say, what does the Torah say? The shivcha and her children belong to the master. They both say that's an incredible indication that halacha l'maisa, those children are not my children, right? If I'm the eved, if I'm the Jewish servant, and I was given a non-Jewish shivcha to have children with, halacha l'maisa, the fact that those children are not mine, even when I leave servitude, though that woman and those children stay with the master, indicates to me that those are not my children. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, if my father were to father a child with a shivcha, and were to have a girl, that girl is not my sister, not my halachic sister. And therefore, there's no issur regarding her. So, Rabbi Yossi Yehuda, chad b'shivcha, v'chad b'avodas kochavim. Bless you. Rabbi Yossi Yehuda says, one pasuk is coming to exclude shivcha, and one pasuk is coming to exclude avodas kochavim, a non-Jewish woman. Utzrichi. And the truth is, I need two different drashas. Why? Diashmoinan shivcha mishum de'ein la chayis. She will say a shivcha has no genealogy. Aval avedes kochavim de'isla chayis emalo. But novedes kochavim, who does have genealogy, maybe I'd say that halacha lemaisa again. The product of that union would be my sister. Viashmoinan avedes kochavim mishum delo shaycha b'mitzvos. Or I will say, maybe I would say that halacha lemaisa, the reason that the product of the union with a shivcha is not considered to be my sister is because avedes kochavim, because a non-Jewish woman has no shaychas to mitzvahs. Aval shivcha the shaycha b'mitzvahs emalo. So I will say maybe halacha lemaisa a shivcha. I will say, the interesting part about becoming a shivcha kinanis is that, remember, there is a quasi-Jewishness to her. She is obligated in certain mitzvos. Therefore, maybe, again, halacha l'maisa, the product of that union with my father should be my sister, to which the Gemara says, tzricha. Therefore, saying two psukim, ultimately, again, for two exclusions. B'rabanan, ashkechon shivcha, ovedes kochav minalhu. Then ultimately, the Rabbanan, I know the case of shivcha. Where do we learn ovedes comes from? So here's what's interesting. Everyone right now seems to be agreeing to the same principle, which is the Torah is coming to exclude a certain case where even though my father fathers a daughter with a woman, that girl is not my sister, halachic sister. Seems to be now the two cases that everyone agrees with are what? Shivcha and avedes kochavim. If he fathers a child, my father's a daughter with a shivcha, a non-Jewish maidservant, or just with a stam non-Jewish woman, those girls who come from that union are not my halachic sister. There's different ways of learning this out from different sources. But halacha l'maisa, everyone's agreeing in principle. Rabbanan, ashkechad shivcha avedes kochavim minalhu. Where do the Rabbanan learn out avedes kochavim? V'chi tema nelef mishivcha. Maybe you'll say that halacha l'maisa you can learn out from shivcha. To which the Gemara says, Hano mitzrach tzrichi. Ultimately, again, both of these psukim are independently necessary. Why? Amar Yochai Shema Yochai. Amar Kra Ki Yasir es bincha me'acharai. So I'll say the pasuk says, ultimately, again, she will take your child, or literally cause your child to veer from behind you, or I should say from behind me, from following me. Hashem says. What do we learn from here? Bincha mi Yisrael is kari bincha. The child you have with a Jewish woman is called your child. But the child you have with a non-Jewish woman is not called your child, rather that is called her child. Ravina says, Shma minha ben bitcha haba mina oved kochavim karei bincha. So what do you see from here? You see from here, ben bitcha. Ultimately, again, the son of your daughter, who comes from an Oved Kochavim, ultimately, again, is called your son. Lema kasav Ravina Oved Kochavim ve'eved haba bas Yisrael havlad kasher. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that halach. So we'll say, so again, halach, and this is indeed halach l'maisa. So let's just take a step back for just a moment. Everyone is agreeing that what? That when the father fathers a daughter from a shivcha or from an ovedes kochavim, right? What's the status of that daughter? What's the status of that daughter? She is not my halachic sister. So were I to have relations with her, ultimately, again, not a good idea, right? But lamaisa, there is no halachic liability for relations with one's sister in that scenario. Everyone is agreeing with that principle. How we get there and how you darshan ultimately is subject to machlokes, which I will say then ultimately reinforces another reality that Rabbi Yochanan said that we just said over in the name of Rosh Shema Yochai, which is that ultimately again, when a Jewish man fathers a child with a non-Jewish woman, that is not called your child. That is called her child. Right? That child is not Jewish, is not Mesiachis, does not have a halachic connection to the Jewish father, but is considered to be solely the offspring of the non-Jewish mother. To which the Gemara says, well, what else do you see from here? The converse is not true. So, for example, Ovid Kochav and Ve'ever Abba Bas Yisrael Havlad Kosher. If a non-Jewish man were to have relations and father a child with a Jewish woman, that child would be Jewish. I say it differently. The Gemara says, kosher. That child is kosher. To which the Gemara says, well, hold up. Nihid the mamzer lo havi, Kasher nami lo havi. So I'll say this is actually very interesting. The Gemara says, look, if a Jewish man fathers a child with a Jewish woman, a non-Jewish man fathers a child with a non-Jewish woman, the child is not a mamzer. But just because you're not a mamzer doesn't mean you're automatically kosher. See, I will say in halacha, the word kosher means what? Without genealogical blemish. Right? Kosher means you're free and clear. You're totally genealogically good. To which the Gemara says, well, maybe in this case, kosher nami lo havi, pasal mikri. Ultimately, I will say he's what's called a pasal. So I will say, and this is actually quite fascinating. So here's what we have. When a Jewish man fathers a child with a non-Jewish woman, that child is not Jewish at all, and of course not at all connected to the biological father. What about when a non-Jewish man has a child with a Jewish woman? What's the status of the child? Child is Jewish. But here's the interesting part. What's the story with that child's genealogy, right? Or lineage, right? What's with its yichus? So the Gemara says, for sure not a Jewish, for sure, right? For sure Jewish, for sure not a mamzer. The question is, can you call that child kosher? So the Gemara wants to suggest over here, no. That child is not called kosher, rather that child is called pasal. Now I will say, what does pasal mean? Now again, this is not really halacha l'maisa, but pasal means there's some type of issue. I will say, I'll tell you where this comes up. This sometimes comes up in a situation of, let's say you have a situation of a non-Jewish father, a Jewish mother, they have a daughter. So is that daughter permitted to marry a Kohen? So there's a discussion in the poskim about that. On one end, you can say, well, she's Jewish, right? But Lamaisa, she is the product of a forbidden union. So is there a certain element of psul that exists in her that would preclude her from marrying a Kohen? So this happens to be a discussion in the poskim, but just understand, there is this fascinating, we're used to thinking about either you're kosher or you're pasal, right? At the end of the day, or I should say either you're kosher or you're tainted. Well, and if you're tainted, your genealogy is tainted or blemished is the better word, blemished in a specific way. Now we kind of see that there is this possibility for what we'll call some type of genealogical cloud to hover over an individual because Lamaisa, the marriage itself was compromised. Okay, just something to keep in mind. To which the Gemara says, Hai b'shiva umos ksiv. To which the Gemara says, well, interestingly enough, that pasuk you just quoted before was written by the 7 indigenous nations. So by the 7 indigenous nations in Canaan and Eretz Yisrael, I understand that halacha l'maisa, the offspring is like the non-Jewish mother. How do you know that applies to other situations of a non-Jewish mother? To which the Gemara says, Ki yasir l'rabos kol hamasirim. So we'll say Ki yasir comes to include all those who would seek to veer the child away from Hashem, which means we both say any non-Jewish woman. So the Gemara says, so the Hanichal Rabbi Shimon, the Darsh time of the Dikra, this makes sense according to Rabbi Shimon, who darshins the general reasoning for Psugim. So both say this is a fascinating machlokes in general. Darshin and time of the Dikra, lo darshin and time of the Dikra. Do we go ahead and darshin the reason for mitzvahs or not? Shabbos said the paradigmatic example of this. Torah says, "Lo sachpo beged almona." You're not allowed to go out and take collateral from a widow. Now, why not? Why not? Shabbos says, so interestingly enough, bepashtos, well, it depends. If you're dashin in time of dikra, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, because she's poor, and you should take it easy on poor people. Number two, because I will say if you take something that she needs every single day, it'll turn out that the creditor is going to have to go back and forth to her house every single day. If that's the case, that could create rumors. Why is this man coming to the house of a single woman, a widowed woman, every single day? So we'll say, right now, however, let's say the widow is rich. If the widow is rich, then halacha l'maisa, again, she doesn't need the collateral. And number two, you're not going to be going back and forth to her house every single day. So l'maisa, then it should be permitted to take collateral. What does this depend on? Do we darshan the reasoning for psukim or not? If we darshan the reasoning for psukim, then maybe you'd be permitted to take collateral from a rich widow. But at the end of the day, if we don't darshan the reasoning for psukim, then halacha l'maisa, whether she's rich, whether she's poor, it doesn't make a difference. The Torah says, don't take collateral from a widow. To which the Gemara says, Sahani Rabbi Shimon the Darsh time of the Kra. So according to Rabbi Shimon, who darshins the reasoning for psukim, will say, just like the woman from one of the 7 nations If you marry her and have a child, well, you can't marry her, but if you have relations with her and have a child with her, that child takes on her identity and not yours. The same is true for any other Gentile woman. El Rabbana minalu, but according to the Rabbanan, how do they know that the pasuk extends beyond women of the 7 indigenous nations? So man tanik depalig alei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Who is one who's arguing with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Shimon. It's Rabbi Shimon ultimately again who darshins time of dikra. Good. So I will say. So bottom line, here's what comes out. Halacha l'maisa, halacha l'maisa. So first of all, let's go back. The Rambam paskins that if a man has relations with his sister, who is both his sister as well as the daughter of his father's wife, he is chayiv twice. Chayiv twice. That's why he paskin like the Rabbanan. That's Aleph. Beis. Halacha l'maisa, one is chayiv for relations with one sister. However, again, what's the definition of sister? The definition of sister has to be someone who comes from a union or comes from a woman that technically my father could have married. Now, we have a very general concept like this. Father could have married means essentially someone who is marriageable. Even though my father personally could not have married her, but she's subject to the halachos of kiddushin. To exclude who? Shivcha and Ovedes Kochavim. That halacha l'maaseh, if my father has a daughter with a non-Jewish woman, that daughter is not my sister, and therefore, technically speaking, there is not halachic liability. We'll see, we then extend that to then say that halacha l'maaseh, you're right, because in general, when a Jewish man fathers a child with a non-Jewish woman, that child's not Jewish. That child's not Jewish, and that child has no halachic connection to the Jewish father. Conversely, if a non-Jewish man fathers a child with a Jewish woman, that child is Jewish. Now, what's the nature of that offspring's genealogy? So, for sure Jewish, for sure not a mamzer. The Gemara kind of floats this concept of pasul. What exactly pasul means and what the ramifications of that are subject to machlokes. Beautiful, Abosai. Amud Beis, brand new Mishnah. Abosai, I sent out a chart today. Again, it's going to get exciting. It's going to get exciting today, right? There are also hard copies. There are copies of the chart right behind Ilana over here also if anybody wants to follow along. So Abosai, here we go. It's actually not complicated. Misha Kiddush Achos Mishtei Achayos. Well, this is an interesting case. If a man was Mekadesh, one of two sisters, Ve'ino Yodea Eza Mehen Kiddush, and you don't know which sister you betrothed. Right? It was Seder night, and clearly you had more than 4 kosos, right? So what happens? A man betroths a sister. I will say, by the way, Rashi does point out, you know how these things happen. Oh, actually, I don't know how these things happen. But Lamaisa, remembering, and I will say, if you have a situation where, let's say, Kiddushin is being affected through shlichus, right, through agency, and there was some type of confusion with the agency. Again, as we see with all of these cases, the how is fundamentally irrelevant. I should say the why or the how is even fundamentally irrelevant. What's relevant is the case. So man was Mekadesh, one of two sisters. And he's not sure which one he was Mekadesh. So what's the halacha? We'll say, no, so we'll say, here's the problem. The problem is he can't live with them. Why can't he live with them? Because they're sisters. You're not allowed to marry sisters. So, and he's not sure exactly which one he's married to, which one he's not married to. The only thing he can do is divorce. So how does he divorce? No saying get lazeh, veget lazeh. Okay, so also, it's actually a pretty easy case. So the only way to remedy the ambiguity is give a get to each of these women. Now again, one of them needs the get, one of them doesn't need the get, and unfortunately, by the way, they're both impacted now, right? Because they both have the status of grusha, which now means neither of them can marry a Kohen. And I will say, and even though in reality only one of them is really a grusha, but nevertheless, that's what ambiguity creates. Mace, we'll say, what happens if this guy, so we'll call him Ruvain, right? So Ruvain was Mekadesh, one woman, now it was one of two sisters, but he's not sure which sister. So again, case number 1, okay, just give them both a get, let everybody move on with their lives. Case number 2 is Ruvain dies. So the same case, I will say. He was Mekadesh, one of two sisters. He's not sure which one. He dies, and now, of course, he dies without children. V'lo ach echad, and he leaves behind one brother. What's the halacha? Choletz l'shtehen. Ultimately, I will say the surviving brother will call him Shimon. does chalitza with both women. It's the same idea. Chalitza with both women. Hayulo shnayim. So I'll say, now listen to this. What happens if Reuven has two brothers, Shimon and Levi? So what's the halacha? Echad choletz ve'echad miyabim. Ultimately, again, one brother does chalitza, and interestingly enough, in this case, the other brother can do yibum. Now, we'll say it doesn't mean he has to do yibum. It means he could even do yibum. So we'll say same case. Reuven was mekadesh one woman, right? One of two sisters. Unsure which one. He died without children. He has two surviving brothers, Shimon and Levi. One brother has to do chalitza, and the other brother technically can do yibum. We'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Hayulo shnayim echad choletz. Tchila la'achos. So we'll say, so the way this has to work is as follows. Reuben dies without children. We'll call him Shimon. Shimon, the first thing that has to happen is Shimon has to do chalitza. Shimon has to do chalitza with one of the women. V'hasheni imratza liyabim l'shniyam yabim. Now we'll say what's interesting about this case is as follows. After Shimon does chalitza, Levi could technically do yibum. Why could he technically do yibum? Now he could do yibum with Rabosai, with the other wife. Let's say again, Reuven, this Safek case was with Rachel and Leah. So what's going to happen? Reuven dies. Shimon's going to do chalitza with Rachel. Technically speaking, Levi could do yibum with Leah. Let's play this out. What's the worst case scenario? If Leah was the actual wife, then what Levi is doing is what? Is yibum. And if ultimately, again, Leah wasn't the real wife, but it was Rachel who was the real wife, that's okay. Because why? Because remember again, Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, which means that anyway, Leah is totally permitted to Levi. So therefore, again, Allah Lamaisa. Now again, I will say, it doesn't mean that Levi has to do yibum. It means he can do yibum. Good. So I will say, so now let's go to this next case. And here we're going to go with the chart. Here we go. Shnayim shekitshu shtei achayos. Ze eni yodea ezo kiddush. So I'll say, okay, here we go. So I'll say, so now here's the case. You have two brothers, ultimately again, who are Mekadesh, two sisters. And what's the problem? Neither brother knows which one he gave Kiddushin to. So there's confusion. So two brothers, two sisters, no one even knew. So ambiguity as to who was Mekadesh. I'll say again, it's the easiest way to think about it is it's a mix-up in shlichus. All of this was happening through an agent, right? The agent, I gave Kiddushin to someone on your behalf. Good news is I can narrow it down, right? Right? It's one of two sisters, right? So at least we've narrowed down the pool. I will say, by the way, that's how these cases happen, right? Kiddushin was affected through shlichus. The shliach knows that he gave Kiddushin to someone. The woman did accept Kiddushin. So I know the good news is I did what you asked me to do. The bad news is I'm not sure who I did it to. Right? So Lamaisa, again, it's happened now with two brothers to two sisters. So Shnayim shekitshu shtei achayos, ze eni yodea ezo kiddush, v'ze eni yodea ezo kiddush. And again, neither brother is sure which woman he was mekadesh. So I'll say, so now what's the halacha? So ze no sein shnei gittin, v'ze no sein shnei gittin. So I'll say this case is always the easiest, right? This parallels the first case in the Mishnah. So two brothers gave Kiddushin through a shliach to two sisters. The only problem is neither brother is sure which woman he is married to. So we'll say easy shmizi. How do you take care of this case? Two gittin, each brother gives two gittin. Easy, right? So again, so Reuven gives two gittin, Shimon gives two gittin, and everybody is good to go. Here's where it gets complicated. Mesu. So we'll say now, what happens if the brothers pass away without children? So Mesu, lezeach, ulezeach. So we'll say now, take a look on the chart by table A. So we'll say, see, here you have it. So what happened over here? So ultimately again, so actually before we get to it, let's read it inside. So we'll say, so Mesu, now what happens? The brothers pass away. Lezeach ulezeach. If ultimately again, each brother, right? Each one had one brother. Lezeach ulezeach. Each one had a brother. Zeh choletz l'shtehen, v'zeh choletz l'shtehen. So we'll say that's also an easy case, right? Why is that an easy case? Because that's the same thing. So in other words, we'll call them Reuven and Shimon, even though we're going to switch the names in just a moment, right? Reuven and Shimon. So same case. Two brothers got engaged to two, or did kiddushin with two sisters. Not sure which one. Case one is where, again, both brothers just give two gittin. Each brother gives a get to each of the women. After brothers passed away, and they each left behind one brother, and they passed away without children, no problem. Each surviving brother does what? Does chalitza with both of the women. Zeh cholis l'shtehen, v'zeh cholis l'shtehen. Easy enough. Easy enough. I will say, now watch this. L'zeh achad, or l'zeh shnayim. I will say, by the way, that's what I just read to you, is table A. That's all table A. We can look at it inside. So we'll say here you have two brothers, right? Two brothers on each side, right? One brother, that's line one. Line one is just telling you the happy family, right? I have two sets of brothers, one set of sisters. Line one is when the world was normal, right? Line two is then what happens? Reuven and Gershon. I'm sorry, I was switching names on. Reuven and Gershon are Mekadesh, the two sisters. What's the problem? We don't know who was Mekadesh who. So if Reuven and Gershon, if they're still alive, what do we do? Allah Chalamaisa? Each of them gives a get to each of the women. Line 3 is Reuven and Gershon passed away. So what happens? But Reuven and Gershon, without children, they both left behind one brother. No problem. The two brothers, Shimon and Kahas, will each do chalitza with each of the women. Beautiful. Okay, so table A is relatively straightforward. Here we go. Lezeh echad ulezeh shnayim. I will say, what happens? Watch this. Now, if you look in table B, what's different over here? Same case. In other words, same case of Reuven and Gershon, both going ahead and being Mekadesh, two sisters, right? But Lemaisa, unsure which sister each one is married to. But I would say Reuven has one brother, Gershon has two brothers, right? That we're looking at table B now. Just table B in line, we could already look at row 2, right? So row 2 again. So same case. So Reuven and Gershon, if they're alive, ultimately each of them should just give two gittin, one to each woman. Now Reuven and Gershon pass away without children. Reuven leaves behind one brother, Shimon, and ultimately again, Gershon leaves behind two brothers, Kahas and Merari. So what happens? So hayachid cholitz l'shtehen. So we'll say this is line 3, table B, line 3. Shimon, who is the surviving brother of Reuven, has to do chalitz with both of the women. Vashnayim and Gershon's two surviving brothers, Kahas and Merari, what could they do? Kahas does chalitza with one woman, and Merari has the ability, should he choose, to do yibum with the other. Lezeh echad ulezeh shnayim hayachid cholitz l'shteihem vashnayim echad cholitz ve'echad miyabim. Ultimately, again, one does chalitza, one does yibum. And I will say the reason for that is because Merari has the ability to do yibum with Rachel, because Iman of Shach, either ultimately, again, Leah was the true wife, and if she wasn't, then halacha l'maisa again, I should say, either Rachel is the true wife, in which case Merari is doing yibum, or at this point in time, Rachel's not the true wife, but she's totally permitted to Merari anyway. Beautiful. Kid Muvakinsu. So also it's an interesting case. Kid Muvakinsu. Let's say halacha l'maisa again. The surviving brothers just ended up marrying these women. Ein motzin miyadam. We don't force them to divorce these women. Why? Because listen, we'll discuss this. Because this whole case is a case of suffix anyway. And since it's a case of suffix, therefore halacha l'maisa, if they went, they did the wrong thing by marrying these women proactively without any level of chalitza. But if they did so, halacha l'maisa, we don't take them out. Lezesh time or lezesh time. So we'll say now we come to table C. What happens if Reuven and Gershon, the brothers, each have two brothers? So what's the halacha? Echav shel zeh cholitz la'achos, ve'echav shel zeh cholitz la'achos, achav shel zeh miyabim chalutzaso shel zeh, ve'achav shel zeh miyabim chalutzaso shel zeh. So we'll say, if you skip down in C, right, to level 3, so we'll say what has to happen over here, so watch this. In this case, where again, Reuven and Gershon pass away, they both leave behind two surviving brothers. How do we deal with this case? So watch this. Shimon does chalitza with one woman on one side, on one brother's side. Kahas does chalitza with one of the women, opposite women. right, on the other side, on what we'll call Gershon side. And here's what's incredible. You can see how this works. Levi has the ability to marry the woman with whom Kaas did Chalitza, and ultimately Merari has the ability to marry the woman with whom Shimon did Chalitza. See, essentially, when you work through all of these steps, halacha lemaisa, we allow these men to do yibum because lemaisa, there's either one of two scenarios. Either the woman who they're doing yibum with is the actual widow, in which case it's totally mutter, or lemaisa, again, she's an unrelated party, in which case it is mutter as well. Kidmu shnayim v'chaltzu, lo yabmu ashnayim. So we'll say ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, if two of the brothers went out and did chalitza, then ultimately the other two should not do yibum. Ela echad cholitz ve'echad miyabim. Rather, one should do chalitza, one should do yibum. Kidmu v'kinsu l'maisa, if again the brothers proactively married these women, ein motziin miyadam. We do not force them to get divorced. So we'll say, so again, it looks complicated, but actually not all that complicated. Halacha l'maisa just want us to go through this series of steps. So we'll say, let's just begin the Gemara one line. Shema mina, what do we learn from here? Kiddushin sheim misrun lebiyah havi kiddushin. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. What you do see from here is that a marriage that can never be consummated is still called a marriage. Now we'll say, this case, let's go back to the first case of Mishnah. What was the first case of Mishnah? Reuven and Shimon, two brothers. What happens? They're Mekadesh. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Forget Reuven and Shimon. One guy, Reuven. Reuven is Mekadeshu, one of two sisters. What's the problem? He doesn't know who. So what's the halacha? We tell him what? You have to give a get to both of them. Now I will say, what's unique about that marriage? What's unique about it? It can never get off the ground. Is he ever permitted to live with either of those women? No. Why? Because there's the risk that maybe the woman he's going to live with is actually not his wife, but rather who? His wife's sister. But yet, the Mishnah calls this a kiddushin. So you see from here that even a marriage that cannot result in biyah is still called a marriage. To which the Gemara says, no. What's the case? First one, we'll finish with this. No. Both say, you read the Mishnah and we think the Mishnah is talking about a case where he never knew which woman he was betrothed to. It's not true. There was some clarity and then ambiguity. Which both say could happen is the Shaliach knew which woman he was Mekadesh for Ruvain, and then Allah Chalamaisa, there was confusion. They can have diktani ve'eno yodeya velo katani eno yodua. Shmamina. So we'll say we're talking about a case. We'll stop over here. We'll say so we're talking about a case where Allah Chalamaisa again. It was known who Ruvain was Mekudash to, or who Ruvain was Mekadesh. There was just subsequent ambiguity. Therefore, because there was a moment where it was known, this is called Kiddushin Misurin Labiyah, a viable marriage. The ambiguity set in later on, which then ultimately again precluded the marriage from actualizing. So we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with the rest of the sugi tomorrow. Shkoyach.
Yeah.
All right, Chevron, everyone have a wonderful day.